You are in violation of community standards. Repair the access road or face a lien on your property. 2 pages, $2,800. For a road I never agreed to maintain on land they didn't understand and a claim they had no right to make. They sent it certified mail, signatures required, like that made it more legitimate. What they didn't know was that the access road they were demanding I repair, the one their entire development used every single day, sat on an easement I had granted in 1996 with conditions they had never bothered to read. Drop a comment, tell me where you're from, and if you've ever had someone claim authority over something that was never theirs to control. I want to hear it. The morning the letter arrived, I was clearing brush along the northern property line of Garrett Ridge, the 95-acre parcel my family had held since 1947. Not because it was required, because it needed doing and I took care of what was mine. The land rolled in long slopes toward the creek bottom, oak and pine mixed through the higher ground, pasture grass in the clearings my grandfather had cut and my father had maintained. This was work that connected me to something older than myself, and I didn't take that lightly. The envelope was thick, the kind with a return address embossed in dark blue ink. Ridgeline Meadows Homeowners Association. I knew the name. Their development sat on the eastern boundary of my property, 140 homes built on land that had been sold off by the previous owner of the adjacent tract in 2003. I had nothing to do with that sale, had never been part of their community, and had no interest in their internal affairs. But I opened the letter because ignoring correspondence is how people lose ground they think is protected. The language was formal, rehearsed, designed to sound more authoritative than it actually was. Stated that the access road serving Ridgeline Meadows had deteriorated to a condition that violated community maintenance standards, that I, as the owner of the underlying property, was responsible for repairs estimated at $2,800, and that failure to comply within 30 days would result in the HOA filing a lien against my property to recover costs. I read it twice. The first time to understand what they were claiming, the second time to identify what they had missed. The road in question was a half-mile stretch of gravel and compacted dirt that ran from County Road 14 through a narrow corridor of my land before opening into the Ridgeline Meadows development. It had been there since the late 1990s, built as part of the original development access plan. What the letter did not mention, and what I suspected the current HOA board did not know, was that the road existed on my property under a specific legal instrument. An easement I had granted in 1996 to the original developer, with terms that were explicit about who bore responsibility for what. I set the letter on the kitchen table and went to the filing cabinet in the back room. The drawer labeled Property 1992,000 held everything I needed. I found the folder without searching, tan cover, labeled simply Easement Grant 1996 Morrison Dev. Inside was the original agreement, signed by me and by the developer, notarized, recorded with the county, and unchanged for 28 years. I turned to page 3, section 5, clause 2, and I read it the way you read something you already know but need to see in writing to confirm your memory is accurate. The grantee, Morrison Development, LLC, and any successor entity utilizing this easement for ingress and egress, shall bear sole responsibility for maintenance, repair, and upkeep of the access road surface, drainage structures, and related improvements. The grantor retains ownership of the underlying land and assumes no obligation for road maintenance beyond ensuring the easement corridor remains unobstructed. I placed the document on the table next to the HOA letter and looked at both of them for a long moment. One was a demand based on an assumption. The other was a recorded legal instrument that contradicted that assumption entirely. I didn't respond that day. Instead, I did what I always did when something required careful handling. I slowed down and I started gathering information. The first call I made was to the Garner County Recorder's Office. I requested a copy of every recorded document associated with the easement corridor, including any assignments, amendments, or transfers of interest filed since 1996. The clerk told me it would take 3 business days. I said that was fine. While I waited, I drove out to the access road and walked its length on foot. The surface was in rough condition, that much was true. Potholes in several places, washboard gravel in others, drainage ditches overgrown and no longer channeling water effectively. It looked like a road that had not been maintained in years, which was exactly what it was. What interested me was not the condition, but the pattern of use. Tire tracks, fresh and layered, showed constant traffic. I counted at least a dozen distinct tread patterns in the soft shoulder near the entrance to Ridgeline Meadows. This was not a lightly used access route. This was the primary, possibly the only way in and out of a 140-home development, and the people using it every day had no idea they were driving across land that had never been sold to them. The documents from the recorder's office arrived on the 3rd day, scanned and compiled into a single PDF. I printed them and spread them across the kitchen table in chronological order. The original easement grant was first. Then a series of routine filings, utility easements, tax records, nothing unusual. And then the document I had been looking for, an assignment of easement rights from Morrison Development LLC to Ridgeline Meadows HOA, dated October 2004. I read it carefully. The assignment transferred Morrison's rights under the easement to the HOA, allowing them to use the access road for ingress and egress to the development. What it also transferred, explicitly stated in Section 3, was Morrison's obligation to maintain the road surface and related infrastructure in accordance with the terms of the original 1996 easement. I checked the signature page. The assignment had been executed by Morrison's legal representative and by the founding board of Ridgeline Meadows HOA. It had been notarized and recorded. Everything about it was procedurally correct. Which meant the current HOA board had inherited not just the right to use the road, but the legal responsibility to maintain it. I sat with that for a while, then I called a name I hadn't called in over a year, Daniel Frost, Real Estate and Easement Law. His office was in the county seat, and he had helped me with a boundary dispute back in 2019. He was methodical, quiet, and he didn't waste time on strategies that wouldn't hold up in a courtroom. I told him I had an easement grant, an assignment document, and an HOA demand letter that appeared to contradict the terms of both. He asked if I had the full chain of recorded instruments. I told him I had everything from 1996 forward. He said to bring it all in Thursday morning. Thursday came and I arrived at Daniel's office with a folder that contained every relevant document in chronological order. He spent 40 minutes reviewing them without speaking, making small notes on a legal pad, occasionally going back to cross-reference a clause from one document against another. When he finished, he set his pen down and looked at me across the desk. "They're wrong," he said simply. "The maintenance obligation transferred with the easement rights. It's right here in the assignment document, Section 3. The HOA assumed Morrison's duties when they took over the easement. They're responsible for the road, not you." I nodded. I had reached the same conclusion, but I wanted to hear it from someone whose professional judgment carried weight in a legal proceeding. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about it. "I want to respond in writing. I want the response to cite the specific instruments and clauses that establish their responsibility, and I want it clear that any attempt to file a lien will be challenged immediately." Daniel made a note. "I'll draft it today. You'll have it tomorrow for review." The response letter went out the following Monday, sent the same way they had sent theirs, certified mail, signature required. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, and it did exactly what I had asked. It cited the 1996 easement grant, the 2004 assignment, and the specific clause that placed maintenance responsibility on the HOA. It stated clearly that I had no legal obligation to repair the road, and that any lien filed against my property would be contested as without legal foundation. I did not expect them to respond quickly. Institutions rarely do when they are confronted with information that contradicts their assumptions, but I was wrong. The call came 3 days later. The voice on the other end identified himself as Brian Calloway, president of the Ridgeline Meadows HOA board. He was polite, almost apologetic, and he asked if we could meet to discuss the situation. I told him I was willing to meet, but that my position was documented and would not change based on a conversation. He said he understood and suggested the following Tuesday at the community center inside Ridgeline Meadows. I arrived at the community center at the agreed time. Calloway was there, along with 2 other board members and a woman he introduced as the HOA's property manager. They offered coffee, which I accepted, and we sat at a table in a small conference room with windows that looked out over the development's Central Park. Calloway began by saying they had reviewed the documents I had referenced in my response letter. He said they had not been aware of the maintenance clause in the assignment and that the previous board had not left clear records about the easement terms. He was careful, measured, and I could see he was trying to find a path that did not involve admitting fault outright. I let him talk. When he finished, I placed a copy of the 1996 easement and the 2004 assignment on the table between us. "These are recorded instruments," I said. "They establish who owns the land, who has the right to use it, and who is responsible for maintaining it. The road is in poor condition because it has not been maintained. That is the HOA's responsibility under the terms you inherited when you took over the easement." One of the other board members, a man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. "We don't have the budget for a $2,800 repair right now. That's why we reached out to you." I looked at him directly. "Your budget is not my concern. The legal obligations are. You have the right to use that road because of an easement I granted 28 years ago. That easement came with conditions. One of them is that you maintain it. If you're not meeting that obligation, that's a problem for your board to solve, not for me to subsidize." The room went quiet. The property manager made a note on her tablet. Calloway shifted in his seat. "What if we split the cost?" he asked, as a gesture of goodwill. I shook my head. "This isn't a negotiation about goodwill. It's a matter of legal responsibility. The documents are clear. I'm not paying for repairs to a road I have no obligation to maintain." Calloway nodded slowly. He looked at the other board members, then back at me. We'll need to bring this to the full board and figure out how to proceed. I stood, that's your decision to make. But I want to be clear, if you file a lien against my property, I will challenge it and I will win because the law is on my side. You'll end up paying for the road repairs and your legal fees. I'd rather you just handled the repairs now and avoided that outcome. I left the community center and drove back along the access road, the same rough surface, the same potholes. Nothing about it had changed, but the conversation had clarified where things stood. 2 weeks passed without contact. Then on a Thursday morning, I saw a work crew at the entrance to the access road. 2 trucks grading equipment, a load of gravel in a dump trailer. I slowed as I drove past and saw a work order sign posted at the roadside. Contracted by Ridgeline Meadows HOA. Road maintenance and repair. I didn't stop. There was nothing to say. They were doing what they were obligated to do and that was the end of it. Daniel called me that afternoon. He had received a message from the HOA's attorney, a brief note stating that the board had reviewed the easement terms and had decided to proceed with road repairs using HOA funds. The attorney also confirmed that no lien would be filed against my property. They folded, Daniel said, completely. I thanked him for his work and told him to send me his invoice. He said it would be in the mail by end of week. The road repairs took 8 days. When they finished, the surface was graded, compacted, and covered with fresh gravel. The drainage ditches had been cleared and regraded. It looked like a road that had been maintained properly, which was what it should have looked like all along. I drove it once after the work was complete, slowly checking the surface and the shoulders. It was solid work, professionally done. They had not cut corners. A month later, Brian Calloway called again. He said the board wanted to establish a formal maintenance schedule for the access road going forward and asked if I had any objections to them conducting regular inspections and repairs as needed. I told him I had no objection as long as they understood that the inspections and repairs were their responsibility, not something I was granting them permission to do. They already had that authority under the easement terms. He said he understood and thanked me for clarifying things. The conversation was brief, professional, and it ended without tension. Ridgeline Meadows has maintained that road ever since. I see the crews out there twice a year, grading and filling, keeping the surface in usable condition. They do it quietly without fanfare because it is simply what they are obligated to do. I still own the land beneath that road. I still hold the easement that allows them to use it. And the terms of that easement, written in 1996 and recorded with the county, remain exactly as they were, clear, enforceable, and unchanged. A younger neighbor asked me once how I had handled the situation so calmly. He said he would have been angry, would have wanted to confront the board publicly, make them admit they were wrong. I told him anger without strategy is just noise. What mattered was not how I felt about their demand, but whether their demand had a legal foundation. Once I confirmed it didn't, the rest was just a matter of communicating that fact clearly and waiting for them to accept it. He asked what advice I would give someone facing a similar claim. I thought about it before answering. Know what you own, I told him, not in a vague sense but specifically. What instruments created your rights? What obligations come with them? What responsibilities belong to other parties? If you don't know those things before someone makes a claim against you, you're starting from a position of weakness. But if you do know them, if you have the documents and you understand what they say, then most disputes resolve themselves. Because the law is not about who sounds more confident or who has a bigger organization behind them. It's about what the recorded instruments actually say. And if those instruments are on your side, you don't need to shout. You just need to show them. The access road is still there, running through the narrow corridor of my land, carrying traffic from 140 homes every single day. The people who use it probably don't think about who owns the ground beneath it or what legal terms govern its existence. They just drive across it the same way they always have. But I think about it. Not often, but sometimes when I'm clearing brush along the northern line or walking the creek bottom in the early light. I think about how close I came to paying $2,800 for something that was never my responsibility, simply because someone in an office sent a letter that sounded official. And I think about the fact that the only thing standing between me and that outcome was a single document, filed 28 years ago, written carefully, recorded properly, and kept in a tan folder in a filing cabinet in the back room of my house. That's the whole story. That's all it ever was. An easement with terms, an HOA that didn't read them, and a man who kept his documents in order.